WisconsinEye's Campaign 2024 programming is sponsored by Wisconsin Counties Association, Nicolet National Bank, Wisconsin Hospital Association, Operating Engineers Local 139, the Wisconsin Realtors Association, the Wisconsin Laborers District Council, and North Central State's Regional Council of Carpenters. To support programs like this, please consider a tax-deductible donation at wiseye.org/donate or by texting WisEye to 44321.
Angela Stroud of Ashland is the Democratic candidate for the 73rd Assembly District. The election is November 5th. Angela Stroud, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Angela, why are you running for this office, and what is your campaign's key message?
Sure. Well, there are many reasons, life converges to make a choice like this. But the big picture reason is we've got to figure out our democracy. We need to build it, strengthen it, and give people reasons to believe in democracy. Faith in government has been waning, and it's up to our legislators to get results for people and to have integrity and to really show what government can be and should be. And so the big picture reason I'm running is because I want to be the kind of representative that I wish I had.
So Angela, if you're elected, what's an example that would be a priority for you, a bill for you to introduce?
Sure. Well, there are many, but I will focus on public education and our need to fundamentally transform how we fund public education. And when I talk about that, I really mean high quality preschool, K-12, our technical colleges, and the UW system. As a lifelong educator, I know what teachers and professors go through, and public schools are the heart of our communities. They're the source of innovation, cultural innovation, but also economic innovation. And so transforming our public school funding formula is going to require legislation, and we've got to get our arms around it. It's a strong Wisconsin tradition to have some of the strongest public schools in the country. And so getting back to that is really just getting back to who we are.
So if you're elected, you'll be entering during a biennial budget year, and the state is now projected to have more than a $4 billion surplus. What would be your top two priorities for use of that surplus funding?
Well, probably number one is the PFAS issue. We have got to deal with that directly, head on, and quickly. We know that these chemicals bioaccumulate, so the longer we take to deal with it, the bigger the issue that we're having. And we're talking about poisoning our bodies, our water, our food supply. That cannot wait. That has to be a top priority. And number two, we see what's happening throughout the state with these referenda. Public schools are struggling. In the city of Ashland and Superior, two of the bigger cities in my district, we see that this is just about wages for teachers. So I would like to see the governor's office and the legislators throughout the state recognizing that when over 100 schools are going to referendum, it's because we're in a crisis. And if we have a budget surplus, we need to use that money to actually address the key issue that our voters are asking us to solve.
Are tax cuts or tax reform in any way part of your platform?
Well, they haven't been as much a part of my platform directly, but when you talk about things like increasing access to healthcare, increasing access to quality education, clearly that has to come from somewhere. It has to be funded. I haven't been in the legislature before. I haven't done the kind of deep dive into budget proposals or even our tax rates that I've been doing in the last 6 months. I've been shocked to see our tax brackets in Wisconsin. It is so regressive. The fact that we have people making up to $16,000 paying 3% of their income to taxes. We have a tax bracket that's households at $27,000 up to almost $400,000 in the same tax bracket. That just doesn't make any sense. And I think the more people throughout the state who know how our tax system is structured, the more they'd realize this isn't fair and it doesn't help us fund these programs and initiatives that many people are asking for. So yeah, we need to reform our tax structure. It just isn't working for us.
You mentioned education as a priority, and I want to ask you specifically about K-12 public education. What do you think is working well in that system, and what really needs to change?
I think what's working well in K-12 is we have dedicated teachers, school staff, and communities that understand that public education is the heart of our communities. What's not working well is the way that we fund this. And so we have got to, in my view, get back to who we've been historically, which is a state that has public dollars for public schools. We see now the effects of school choice over time. We cannot afford two systems. What we're doing is subsidizing one system and failing the core system. So it doesn't work. I think we can all agree at this point it's a failure. If you look around at all these referenda that are being proposed, that is an indication of how bad things have gotten. And so I think that we need to take that seriously. I think we also need to recognize that teachers have to be a part of the conversation. Nobody understands the classroom better than teachers, which is why collective bargaining matters. It's not just about their wages and benefits. It's also about giving them a voice. And so, I think what's working well is that our teachers are passionate and dedicated, but we're really putting them under a lot of pressure. And so it's not a surprise that we see low morale and we see people leaving the profession.
What about the state's higher education system, the system of four-year colleges, two-year colleges, technical colleges? What does the future of that system look like to you, and what would you propose that the legislature focus on?
So my background is in higher ed, and one of the things that we all have to confront is that there are demographic changes. And so that is putting pressure on all facets of higher ed, whether it's technical colleges or four-year institutions. That's a real problem to address. We know we're not going to address it, though, by this race to the bottom that the legislators put the UW system through, where they have to compete for a shrinking pool of students. We have to invest in our UW system. It is one of the best assets this state has, despite the fact that we've been systematically underfunding it over more than a decade now. So what could they do if we actually invested in the system in the ways that we should, given its value? And so we're simultaneously going to have to put more money into these systems while also recognizing that demographic decline is going to put pressure on enrollment. We need to be honest about that, upfront about it, and then strategically plan for that. And so what that looks like specifically, I don't know, but we have to be honest that is a difficult current and future sort of constraint that higher ed is facing.
But you support full funding of the Universities of Wisconsin system?
Of course. I mean, we get dollars back on every dollar we invest, just like in education generally. Every dollar we invest in the UW system, we get back in, massively when it comes to the innovation of the people of this state. So it's a huge economic driver, and we have to be willing to invest in economic drivers.
What do you see as the state's largest workforce development challenge, and how would you propose to address it?
Demographic decline. Our birth rates are lower than they've ever been, and so we have an aging population. My district in particular is, kind of tilts elderly baby boomers. And so we have to be aware that with a shrinking workforce, we can't just, not have unions at the table and not have competitive wages and not have competitive benefits and strong working conditions. We need all of those at the table now more than ever, because we need attractive jobs that make it so that workers want to stay in the state. Talk to anybody who lives in a border community with another state, and you'll see we have people who live in Wisconsin sometimes and work in, for example, Minnesota, because working conditions are better. We can't afford to be losing workforce because we're not taking care of our workers. So birth rates we can't necessarily control, although immigration is probably part of the story. We can definitely control the working conditions of the people in this state.
I have a few more workforce questions for you.
Sure.
Investments in public and energy infrastructure grow our state's economy. This also provides an opportunity to invest in our state's workforce. But currently, there are no requirements for hiring local workers. Would you support a state resident hiring requirement for state, local, and utility scale infrastructure investments?
Requiring local workers, I would want to look at that. I would want to look at all of the pros and cons of a policy like that. I do though think that the systematic stepping away from unions that has happened over time is actually probably one of our biggest issues. So when we think about not having competitive wages and not having unions at the table, that's what I'm focused on currently. But I always say, if that's an idea that actually has promise, if that would be something that would promote our workforce, then I would be willing absolutely to take a look at it.
Employee classification is an issue in the construction industry. Some employers misclassify workers as independent contractors or pay them in cash off the books. This lowers costs by avoiding payroll taxes and unemployment insurance, and it puts compliant companies at a disadvantage when bidding on projects. Plus, misclassified workers may be denied minimum wage protections or overtime pay. Are you aware of this issue, and what do you think should be done about it?
I was just meeting with the building trades last week and I heard a bit about this. It's illegal. It needs to be investigated. It needs to be something that is sort of systematically looked into. Anytime we're doing something that's driving down the wages of our workforce and that's making particularly unions less competitive, because we know that's the foundation of a strong economy is having a strong workforce, then we can't tolerate it. It's illegal for a reason, and it hurts workers, it hurts state revenues, and I would say even for these employers, you're not getting quality labor when you're skirting the rules, and so we need to be above board in how we handle things, and that's just another example.
Moving on to housing. Affordable rental housing is an issue in Wisconsin. Some support government-imposed rent control to maintain affordability, while others argue keeping rent artificially low will decrease rental supply, resulting in increased prices. What is your sense of housing as an issue, and which best addresses rental housing affordability? Is it rent control, building more rentals, or some other solution?
You know, I understand rent control as a strategy that might be utilized in some areas. In the 73rd, I don't see an argument for it. And so it's not something that I've thought seriously about as something that would make sense in this district. But the idea that having some sort of control on the price of rent is going to suppress rentals is illogical. Like what we need in terms of our housing supply is we need supply. And so we know that there are factors that are constricting supply. One is the growth of short-term rentals. The other is the lack of building. And so those two forces are an enormous burden when it comes to housing availability. And so if we're not doing something to constrain both of those things, and one of those in terms of short-term rentals is we need more local control. The fact that lawmakers in Madison have made it impossible for the Bayfield City Council or Bayfield County Board of Supervisors to do anything about their local housing market because they don't have local control is absurd. And so I think that the best interest for a community is understood by the residents of that community, and they need to have options for freeing up housing supply.
Moving on to healthcare. Medical systems are facing numerous headwinds in the form of inflation, workforce development, and issues around Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement, resulting in fewer services and even the closure of a hospital system in Western Wisconsin. What would you do to preserve access to care and prevent future closures?
The number one thing we have to do right away is accept Medicaid expansion. Everyone knows it. The fact that it hasn't happened yet is one of the signal failures of our legislature. And so those leaders who have been barriers to Medicaid expansion need to stand up and take some accountability for these hospital closures. Medicaid expansion would save the state $400 million a year. We are not one of those states that would end up paying more. We would save money. With those savings, we should raise our Medicaid reimbursement rates. That is a game changer. Talk to any healthcare professional, any provider. They will tell you that is their number one barrier. We also need to petition our federal government to raise Medicare reimbursement rates. It's hurting our nursing homes and other healthcare sectors. And so this is one of our responsibilities. Anyone who is not on the side of actually fixing it is absconding their responsibility, and they're just not dealing with what their constituents are asking for and needing.
What about mental health care? I'm wondering what you're hearing about that in the district and what are some solutions?
Huge issue. We need availability and access. And just as is true with workforce problems, When you're a border community like the city of Superior, you really see this issue because there are many providers who will not set up shop in Wisconsin because it's just economically not viable. So they set up in Duluth. And then what happens is, depending on your insurance, and especially if you're on Medicaid, those providers won't see you because they just can't make it work economically. The thing about Medicaid expansion that's so critical is that Medicaid also covers mental health care and addiction treatment. So I'm not on Medicaid, but I have private insurance. And if if we fix Medicaid in this state, there are more providers available for everyone. So you have more mental health care providers because now Medicaid is covering more people and being reimbursed fairly. Now, anyone, private insurance or not, who needs access to those resources now has greater availability. And so Medicaid is a major driver of the healthcare industry. And so with mental health care in particular, we're going to see benefits and addiction treatment, both of which, of course, are correlated, and both of which are desperately needed in my district.
How should Wisconsin move forward on the issue of abortion?
Yeah, we need to legalize it. And that's what the survey data show for people in this state. Legalizing access to abortion is the moral thing to do, and I knocked doors recently in Superior and a woman said, I'm adamantly pro-life, but even more than that, I'm adamantly of the belief that the government should not be making this decision for women. And I find that position to be the most common that I find among pro-life people. Of course, as a Democrat, maybe that's, they're sharing that view with me. But very few people want government in their lives. So why in this most intimate, most complex of issues would we say, here's the one exception where the government can decide what happens to your body? The government can't tell you to donate blood or donate a kidney, but it can tell you here what to do with your body. And it's really complex. It's not just, do you want a child or not? There are medical issues that come up. There are all sorts of complexities. And so it's the gray area of life that is what all pregnancies are about. And
Should
so
there be any number of weeks that are a limit here?
Under Roe v. Wade, that was considered acceptable and constitutional, and most states had gestational limits. I feel comfortable with that idea, again, because it's logical. If a woman's body is required for a fetus to develop, it's her right. But if a fetus is viable beyond a certain point, if the state wants to require that she keep the child, then the state is going to have to step in and provide care. And so viability limits to me have become kind of the norm, and they make sense to me. However, there always has to be exceptions because many catastrophic and tragic things happen in pregnancies beyond 24 weeks. And doctors and women should be able to make those decisions that come up as a result of those difficulties without the state trying to decide, is her life at risk or not? Is this truly viable or not? That's a choice between the doctor and the woman.
Moving on to transportation. What are the pressing transportation needs in your district, and how important is it that these needs are addressed and for the state to keep on schedule with reconstruction of aging interstates and significant corridors of commerce?
We actually don't have any interstates in my district. It's one of the unique and awesome parts of the 73rd. But of course, transportation issues still exist. We have a rural transit bus that is really important in the Chequamegon Bay. In the city of Superior, there's a bus system that's really critical. One of the biggest issues in the 73rd, because so much of it is rural, is the state of our roads and funding for our roads. County boards spend an enormous amount of time trying to figure out how to stretch meager resources to deal with the fact that we have long and difficult winters. We have logging trucks on our roads. It's just a really difficult issue for local administrators to deal with. And the state's going to have to figure out the shared revenue problem, especially when it comes to these basic infrastructure questions. And all of us should realize, I saw an analysis years ago, how much each individual Wisconsin car owner pays in repairs and tire replacement because our roads are in such bad shape. So it's a cost we all bear, and figuring it out up front would save us all money in the long run.
At the top of our interview, you mentioned PFAS as a priority for you. How would you specifically propose to address PFAS contamination into the future?
Number one, we have to figure out exactly how is it getting into our water supply. And we need to do the analysis and investigation to determine that. Once we know precisely how it's getting in, those chemicals need to be banned, regulated. Democrats last year proposed phasing out PFAS. That bill did not get the light of day that it should have. And again, I believe this should not be a partisan issue. It's whether you're Republican or Democrat, bioaccumulating toxins in your body is a bad thing. And so regulation, strict regulation. I mean, should these chemicals even be allowed in our supply, in our food supply, or in our economy? Is there a compelling reason? I don't think we need Teflon. We don't need fast food wrappers lined with toxins. We don't need paper cups lined with toxins. And how do we know we don't need them? Because we had a world without them and we introduced them. And now they are killing people. And so we have to regulate them. We have to ensure they're not getting into our supply. And then unfortunately, at this point, we have to figure out remediation. And all of that's going to cost a lot of money, unfortunately.
Final two questions. What are the leading differences between you and your opponent?
Our philosophy on government is a big one. I think that government has an important role to play in our lives, and which is why we owe it to the people of this state to get our act together as a legislature. The other is, I've spent my career as a sociologist. I research all of these things in an in-depth fashion. We had a recent debate, and my opponent said, I don't know much about Medicaid because I'm on VA healthcare. Well, I'm also not on Medicaid. I have private insurance, but I know a lot about it because it's so central to our state's larger healthcare infrastructure. And it's the role of the legislature to know a lot of things. So as a sociologist who studies issues in an in-depth fashion, I feel like I have the right research skills and sort of temperament when it comes to trying to understand the best way forward. I don't believe that the best idea is a Republican idea or a Democrat idea. The best idea is the best idea. And we have to have the willingness to dig into the complexity of issues and have a commitment to solving problems.
Your final question. Let's say you're elected this fall and you get a magic wand you can use in the state capitol to resolve one issue in a way that brings all parties and people together. What's the one issue?
Oh, it's so tempting with a magic wand to have to trick you and have many, many answers to that. But instead, I'll honor the spirit of the question and say, fixing our public school funding formula writ large, I think would be the magic wand solution. And when I talk about fixing it, I'm talking about fully funding special ed, ensuring that our teachers have collective bargaining and have good wages and benefits, ensuring that our students have what they need, again, high quality preschool all the way through whatever level of education they seek, because that would have the single biggest impact on the people of our state. It would affect every single property tax payer. It would affect every employee. This is one of our biggest employers, and it would affect every single student. And so I think about biggest impact when I think about some of the changes we need to make. And so that's the one, if I had to pick one, that's the one I'd pick.
Well, thank you, Angela Stroud of Ashland, the Democratic candidate for the 73rd Assembly District. The election is November 5th. Angela Stroud, thank you for talking with WisconsinEye.
Thanks for having me.
This programming is brought to you by our generous sponsors. Thank you for watching.